Hey there, greetings everybody. GleeCon coming at you yet again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We are going to continue plowing through, even though we've established this takes us outside of the Warcraft 3 timeline and pushes us through in little segments, almost montage-like, from key moments that Sylvanas was part of the Warcraft lore. In the last couple episodes, the Forsaken joined the Horde, and then in the very last chapter, she was instrumental in having the Blood Elves join the Horde. So stay a while and listen as we continue this beat after beat in chapter 19 of the novel Sylvanas. Ghosts. How many of them were there here in her homeland? How many had Sylvanas herself birthed with her song of torment and death? Sylvanas did not go directly to Windrunner Spire. She instead traveled up the road for a long time, nodding to the Forsaken she had sent to Tranquillion, noting the unnaturally aggressive and sometimes horribly transformed wildlife in the area, as well as the Scourge who prowled near the Scar. She passed the road branching to the east and continued on to Golden Mist Village. She had had friends there once, before the Orcs, before Arthas, before everything. The skeletal horse obediently bore her toward the village, but then Sylvanas halted it. She could see the curves of the buildings, the same graceful curves that were utilized throughout the kingdom. In the pallid, sickly light, she could make out figures moving. Figures who had an odd light of their own, who were translucent, who bore the form of elves. Sylvanas almost turned back to the road, but something stopped her. Anger, never far, always hot, flared in her like a torch. This was his doing. He whom she hated with all that was in her, just as she was his doing now. She could not change that, but she could do something about the spectral beings who had once been Quel'Darai. Sylvanas uttered a war cry as she charged, releasing the reins and reaching for her bow with one hand and an arrow with the other. She aimed and let fly, a smooth motion, perfect in its accuracy and grace, one she had made so many times she could not count them all. It was as natural to her as running, as drawing breath when she lived, as hate in her undeath. She looked for those she knew, to whom she might whisper a parting word, but their features were a blur. They were solid enough to destroy, however, in their bizarre, semi-present existence, and she cut them all down, not knowing if they would return, or if she had perhaps sent them to a better fate than this half-life they endured. Sylvanas dismounted and regathered her arrows, which appeared almost exaggeratedly solid in nigh-transparent bodies. There was nothing on the tip to indicate a kill. There were not many of them, and for that Sylvanas was grateful, but there were enough. The horse's hoofs clattered on stone as she rode the creature down every street, checking every home, taking down every specter she could find until she had searched the entire village. She remounted and turned south. A sense of dread seeped into her. How was that even possible? She, the Dark Lady, the Banshee Queen? Doubtless children were frightened into good behavior by the very mention of her name. She commanded the dead. She feared nothing. Except it would seem she did. The outskirts of Windrunner Village came into view. The ruination Arthas had brought with him had claimed this place too. Her memories of it were grim and painful. For a moment her mind's eye saw it littered with corpses, some elven, some orcish, but then the grass had been green, the sky blue. Now there seemed to be nothing other than silence. Sylvanas steadied herself and rode forward. The still air broke into sound, and gray figures began winging their way toward her. Gargoyles, Arthas's pets that he had left behind to guard the area. Guarded from who? The Quel'Darai were all but extinct. A memory flashed into her mind, standing to face Arthas atop his undead horse. I am Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger General of Silvermoon. I advise you to turn back now. Death itself, as he had gloated, had come to her land, and she was powerless to stop it. She aimed and fired, and Arthas, wielding Frostmourne, the blade that was to take her life, and so much more, sliced the arrow in two. Death in the form of animated gray stone dropping from the sky to seize Vorithil, snarling, snatching him up with sharp fingers. The elf had survived so many battles, including the legendary Battle of the Seven Arrows, but a carved monster would be his end. His blood dripped like warm, wet, coppery rain on her face. Her arrow failed her again, this time shattering against stone. The gargoyle dropped its plaything, but not before slashing Vorthil's throat. How terrifying they had been to the woman who had been Ranger General. Now she brought them down easily, almost casually. She was so much stronger than they, so much stronger than the woman she had been on that dark day. But once the threat was ended, Sylvanas did not feel so strong. Other memories, older but still painful, were surfacing powerfully. Here was where the girl in the wine-red dress had fallen. Over there, she had discovered Belaria Salinar. Closer into the main part of the village, Aravan and Rendris had died. And there... She dismounted and walked to the place where the great hurt, the wound that had dogged her feet with its weight of grief and guilt, had been inflicted. Sylvanas stood where she had found his body, where the little Lord's son, so glorious and bright and warm, had been slain. A setting sun. But there was no dawn for those he left behind. He was gone. At least she hoped he was gone. Or did she? She had seen no ghosts, not here. Now, in the silence and the unnatural twilight, she spoke his name. Lerath. Sylvanas waited, tense, hoping to see his face even translucent and spectral, but also dreading to see it. Silence. Slowly she relaxed. Exhaustion settled upon her, and she realized just how much his death continued to affect her. It seemed as though her baby brother was truly resting in the peace he so deserved after the tragedy he did not. Calmer now, Sylvanas rode to where his grave was. It was still an eversong, and wilting grass covered it, all but hiding the slight swell in the earth. Arthas had not raised him, and she was profoundly glad for his one unknowing act of mercy. Sylvanas sank down at his graveside on the sun-warmed grass, drawing her knees to her chest and resting her arms on them. "I am so sorry," she said quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I've thought that every time, every step, and it has been. I died protecting my people. I fought for my freedom. I reached out to friends who I thought would..." She bit her lip for a moment, then continued. "I did what I needed to do to ensure my survival and that of others like me. Sometimes there are no good choices, and yet one must still choose." She shook her head. "Is it even a choice, then? I wonder. I cannot trust the living to understand. Perhaps you will." But there was something after life, something good and comforting. She knew. It had almost been hers. If there was any justice anywhere, that place, that feeling, that softness was now Lerath's. "I wish we had gone there together, my little Lord's son," Sylvanas whispered. "I accomplished nothing in the end. I died, and I did not stop Arthas, and I existed only to harm at his whim for too long. I am no hero. I am but a fool." Her own ears could hear the pain and self-pity in her words, and that angered her suddenly. What was the use in pathetic wistfulness? The gentleness of that place she had glimpsed was gone, and softness would do her no good. There was no place for it now in her world. She needed to be strong and focused, and to hew to her purpose, no matter the cost. The Lich King slumbered for the moment deep in his ice, but not forever. Not forever. And the world could not bear what he would wreak upon it a second time. Anyone who could not see that was a fool. She had come to see if her brother was a spirit, and to send him to peace if so, but he appeared to have gone before her in all ways, and there was no need. It was both a comfort and an ache, and as she mounted her steed and turned its skull to the south, Sylvanas vowed to cease prodding this old wound, and like the ranger she had been and still was, return to the hunt. Sylvanas was heading toward the apothecarium to demand an update from Putress, from whom she had heard little recently, when one of her rangers stopped her. "My lady," she said, You have a visitor in the royal chambers, seeking an audience with you. Someone I know. I am uncertain, my lady, but I assured them you would meet with them. They bear a gift for you, I believe. Sylvanas had little patience for the less consequential, more polite aspects of running a city and a government, and she scowled. She barely had time for her lieutenants and advisors, let alone some adventurer or peasant bearing a gift. But she was mindful of courtesies. Still, she was curt, even when they pulled out a piece of jewelry that looked somehow familiar. Sylvanas plucked the necklace from their grasp and was stunned. It was beautiful and terrible and ignited a cascade of chaotic emotions. Memories she thought locked behind a solid wall burst forth, almost overwhelming her. To Sylvanas, love always, Illyria. Crafted to their mother's wishes, based on the colors her daughter had worn one night, given to Illyria by both father and mother as she left for the wider world that called to her, so Illyria would not forget her family, broken down by the eldest daughter and gifted to each of them. "It can't be," she whispered. "After all this time, I had thought it was lost forever." She had worn it the day she had fallen to Frostmourne. She was already far too raw from her visit to Quel'Thalas, from stilted conversations with old friends, to fighting the ghosts of people she had known, to the graveside confession. This sent her reeling, and she turned her full fury upon the hapless traveler, with thought only to do something kind. "You thought this would amuse me," she fairly spat. "Do you think I longed for a time before I was the queen of the Forsaken?" She took a step forward, gazing haughtily down at the one who had given her this jeweled torture. "Like you, it means nothing to me, and Illyria Windrunner is a long-dead memory." She opened her hand and the pendant dropped to the stone floor. "You may now remove yourself from my presence," she told them, and they did. She watched them go, both her hands now clenched into fists. Who was she ready to fight? The adventurer? Illyria? Fate? Sylvanas stood for a long time, then slowly, stiffly, she knelt and picked it up, closing her fingers over it gently, so gently, as if it would shatter. Nothing, she realized, was a long-dead memory. Everything simply lurked in wait to remind her of what she had lost and those who had abandoned her at the worst possible moment. Sylvanas closed her eyes, brought her fisted hand to where her unbeating heart was. She had to hear it, one last time. As she opened her mouth to sing, the softer voices of her banshees joined, and a haunting, achingly beautiful sound came forth. It wandered like mist through the empty, echoing chamber, like something half glimpsed out of the corner of the eye. She could hear the harp as Lyrath played, his pure tenor carrying the old song to listening ears. They were children when they sang it, really, children who had no idea of the true depth of horror behind the words. Children who were so ignorant of what was out there in the world and beyond it, ignorant of the terror and grief that would soon shatter and scatter them. A song that was for Sylvanas fixed in time, sung when the world held beauty and was kind. It was, as its name stated, a lament of the highborn, those who were gone and replaced by spirits and corpses and children of the blood. Sylvanas listened for a moment, eyes closed, head bowed, then she too sang softly. Shindu Sindorai, Shindu Farana, Sindorai, Anarara Belore, Belore. The last note hung in the air and then faded. Sylvanas paid no attention to the singers who drifted off when they realized they were no longer needed or wanted. The last time she had sung it, the bright boy of sunshine lay cold and dead in her arms, his voice forever stilled. Sylvanas found herself on her knees, trying and failing to stem all that she was feeling. Why can't I let it go? Okay, so this was actually pretty cool for a few reasons. Story-wise, within the context of the novel and what's going to happen to Sylvanas at the end of Shadowlands, you're getting an inside peek into the fact that she does have this emotional core. While faint and strained and damaged, there is something within her. It is not dead. her soul, maybe, or her morality, her conscience, her ability to love, it's not gone. There is something of it still within her. And we show this struggle and her character as being more than just ruthless. So while from a story beat perspective, not that much happens here, she gets tiny bits of closure. It is important for the overall picture. This is probably more important than the past 5 chapters combined in terms of the story of why you're able to reach her at the end of Shadowlands. But in some ways, an even cooler thing is we just made an appearance. You, me, everyone. We just made an appearance in the Warcraft lore for maybe the first time ever. In Warcraft 1, 2, 3, you are taking on the form of heroes, of legendary characters, people that you ultimately interact with and maybe even get to experience memories of, but you are not them in the world of Warcraft. But here for the first time, you are that adventurer. You're that quest giver that returns the amulet to Sylvanas and can hear the lament of the Highborn. That's a quest. I don't know if it's classic. I think it is, but it might be from Burning Crusade. But I think it's from classic time, actually. But I'm not 100% sure. It might be Burning Crusade. We'll find out when we go down that path. If it's classic, it makes me feel better about reading this now because we're not as far into the future. But it might be Burning Crusade. That's really irrelevant. That impact that you have on her, the little things you do, are impacting the heroes and are now noted. That's something pretty cool. It's almost breaking that fourth wall in a way, but not really. It's nice that we can be acknowledged, because that's one of the jarring things about playing World of Warcraft is you are a freaking legend in that game. The things that you do as a hero, the times you've saved the world and were contributed to saving the world, like, it makes it crazy that you don't get talked about more outside of little quest giver sentences from time to time. So this is cool that we can be put into the novel. All right, we got another episode in the pipe, 5x5. We got one more chapter and then a little interlude to go, and then we'll hop right back over and continue our final stretch through Warcraft 3. This episode in the pipe, 5x5. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. I'll see you next time on Lore.